Hi, folks. This is International Master John Watson, and this show is called Ask the Master, and it's on ICC TV on YouTube. The main idea of the show is to ask you, the viewers, to send me questions about chess and the chess world, to give you the opportunity to ask a master about the chess world and various chess questions. You can ask these questions in advance by sending an email to askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. You can also, if you're an ICC member, message me at my handle John L. Watson. Occasionally, people also put things below the show in the little area underneath YouTube, but that's probably not the most efficient way. And you can use the chat, which is on your right, and I see that Alan and Colin are already there. Now, as far as topics, one thing I wanted to say is that I put up the new set of shows, of list of topics for each show going back to a couple years ago. It's been about 2 years now. In terms of openings. So I give opening topics and ECO codes under the names and codes. That's on my Facebook page. That's John L. Watson, 3 words, John space L space WATSON. It's on my timeline, not the main page. And you'll see it's one of the top listings where it has all the shows going all the way back up to last week. So take a look there, and those have the typical. Now, one of the typical things we talk about is openings, and that's why I list all the openings there, because they're easy to reference. And we also talk about chess strategy, chess books, chess videos. I've been having people send games, so we're showing a few of your games. And we're there. You can really talk about anything about chess. We can talk about great players. We can talk about chess history, anything that sort of comes up, the improvements, ideas for improvement, and that sort of thing. If you want to, you can also go back to old shows, take a look, and see what other people have asked. So please, I encourage you to send an email to askimwatson@chessclub.com. Okay, so here we are on the chat. I'm going to take a look at the chat, and then I've got a few things to catch up to from last week. We have Alan and Colin talking to each other. Getting a late start. This is great. I've got modest goals, Colin says, aiming for 2,000 by 2020. Oh, you can do that for sure. Alan says he's aiming for 1900 by 2200. 1800 by 2200. Hey, that's a good one. Well, with the new anti-aging theories, there's this idea that we'll have it more in about 50 years. We'll have the key to stopping cells from aging, and you'll be just fine. All right. What else do we have? Hi, Sandro. There we go. Hi, ears. And I'm going to just go ahead then with things, and I'll return to the chat later to get some questions. Let me see. What's the first thing this week? Okay, I've got a correction. This is especially aimed at Alan. Last week I was talking about whether he was in Henry V or not, Captain Llewellyn, but of course I was wrong. On the shows I'm just getting ancient and forgetful. It's Captain Fluellen, who is Henry V's good buddy, good Welsh buddy, who is always talking about the laws of war. So Fluellen, not Llewellyn, and that's really too bad. Hello, John Thomas. Hello, Chess Philosopher. We've got the whole crew here. Okay, that was one thing. The other thing is that I was asked last week about the Clarendon Court. Let me show you what the Clarendon Court is. That's sort of a Benoni-ish kind of thing with F5. Playable, but marginal. Kind of interesting though, and interesting to see what Black's trying to do is, first of all, commit White to advancing that pawn a little far, and then controlling central squares. So it's not completely illogical, but that F5 move is always a little bit risky because it opens up the king a little bit, and Black hasn't developed a piece yet either. Not that White has. But anyway, what I wanted to do is make a correction. It turns out that the Clarendon Court is actually a mansion that was built around the turn of the century in Newport, Rhode Island. That's in the United States. And it was the home of Klaus von Bülow, who famously was convicted of murdering his wife, but then was exonerated in his next trial, his wife Sunny. So this was this famous trial. And if you go online and Google it, there's just tremendous amounts of material about it. It was a very controversial trial and very high publicity. So anyway, the Clarendon Court was their mansion. And as far as I can make out, that was it was actually originally called the Clarendon Court for his girlfriend or wife or somebody, Clara, and it became Clarendon, which sounds better. So anyway, let me just show you one line that can possibly, since I was asked about it, that can possibly give black some trouble. White develops a piece and thinks about just blasting through with e4. Black tries to stop that. White plays e4 anyways again, but I just thought I'd show you this very direct way of playing. It's not like winning, but it's, now by the way, you could also play this immediately, and black really doesn't have anything better to do than knight f6 here. So it's actually just a transposition. All right, so black takes that, and here's a simple way to, there's all kinds of things you can do here. You can play knight here, which is actually in my book, to play knight g5. That's actually in my strategic opening repertoire for white book. And also, what else can you do? Is there any other move here that's particularly special? But anyway, the one I give here, the one I'm thinking about showing you is just very, very simple. You're just going to take that back, and then you've got much the better pawn structure. So you're not trying to bowl him over or checkmate him, and you're just trying to get the better pawn structure. And just to show you that, usually black's going to try and get the bishop here and the pawn here like I described last week. White takes, black takes, because otherwise there's a checkmate, by the way. Little trick there, I should have shown you that. Black's got to be a little careful here. Well, if he made a completely random move, there'd be checkmate in one. But even if he plays this move, that's got to be an undesirable check to allow. So black takes, and then just develops. Stops the move d6, which can be quite dangerous. And then he's going to play bishop g7 is the idea. White develops, black develops. The problem is if black plays here to bring the knight over quickly, then this knight coming up is pretty dangerous, because if the knight moves again, we have this check, which is pretty much winning. So really black would have to probably stop that check and put the queen on b6 or a5 or something, I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe actually, maybe even better would be this move, actually, now that I think about it. To stop queen a5 and to stop that move because of bishop takes b5. Anyway, white's clearly better because of that thing on e6, that control of e6. So, okay, so bishop g7, knight g5 anyway, big control of that square. White's also thinking of maybe playing some move like this and stopping black from castling with while having a mate threat. So black's got to be a little careful here. So black gets castled. White simply develops. That's in anticipation of this move, bishop f5. White could maybe go this way too, but this makes more sense to stay centralized and keep attacking that square. So here you have the disadvantage of the Clarendon court. These pawns come up early, and then that pawn almost has to play there at some point, so then you've got a big hole on e6. And really, black's perfectly well developed here. It's just a question of a weakness. So I'm just showing you a sample line. These are probably have fairly decent moves for black, by the way. So I'm not really cheating that much in terms of making just good moves for white. So this is just an example. So white gives up his good knight, his beautiful knight, but the king's exposed along the long dark square diagonal. I think that's roughly where I stopped. Yeah. And you can always play c4 also. So white has more space, but more importantly, he's going to play bishop b2 check, rook e1, rook e2, double rooks, and just have a tremendously strong game. The king is too exposed. Okay, so that was fairly quick. And the question is, why not bishop b5 check earlier? Yeah, Kenneth Branagh did a great job on his Henry V. I'm not a huge Kenneth Branagh fan. I saw him in London in another Shakespearean performance. But I think in that movie he was fantastic. And also he directed the movie and just did a brilliant job. Yes, well, I didn't. I think the Swedish Wallander is better, in my humble opinion. Okay, what do we got here? Why not bishop b5 check? Yeah, it depends when. Let me see when he had the chance to play bishop b5 check. Maybe the problem with bishop b5 check is it just gets his pieces developed. I mean, it depends on the timing. So we're talking about at what point? Well, it can't be yet because he hasn't played d6 yet. Yeah, so you could play bishop b5 check here. That wouldn't be a bad move. I think maybe the issue is, you know, you make a move like this and he attacks that knight. Now, do you really want to take it when that's sort of covered? Or do you want to, well, I'm sorry, there's also a check here, isn't there? There's a check here, so that's even worse. So white should castle. I'm sorry, white shouldn't play knight f3. White should do something else. But see, there's this tempo. I'm just not that thrilled with it because black's still planning to go there and castle and play knight up. But it's certainly a move, and white would certainly still have the advantage. So it's a good question. What have we got going on here? The vulture. Were you asking about the vulture? I can show you the vulture. Actually, that's funny because Kaiserberg magazine, Stefan Bücher's magazine, covered the Clarendon court, and he's the one who's famous for the vulture. He not only developed the theory of the vulture, but he also published most of the analysis on it and called it the vulture. The vulture is, by the way, okay, let's see it real quickly. I think, okay, if I get it right. The vulture is, what is the vulture? The vulture is knight e4 immediately here. That's the vulture. And I don't think it's all that good, but it's kind of fun. The same idea, actually. He still wants to play here and here. He'd love to play f5, and he might play the knight back to d6. Arguably, the vulture is a little more logical than the Clarendon court because it doesn't expose black's king as much, but still, it's not the greatest opening if white plays well. All right, so that's the Clarendon court correction. So it's a United States mansion, not a London one. I promised to show a couple games. I won't go into depth on these, but I'm going to try to find instructive points. I'll see how many of these I get through. I've got one game that was sent me that's not by the readers, it's by grandmasters, but I think it's worth showing. But we'll start out. This is a game, let me see, bring this up here. Alan's game from quite a long time ago. Alan has sent me various games, and I've pretty much, I think I've ignored him a lot, so we'll try to make up for that, Alan. So here we go. Alan's white, and sorry, Alan's black. And it turns into this is kind of a strange opening, but now we're getting into an e4 opening with d6, and guess what? Now we're in a Peert's defense. So that's the same as e4, d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3. So we're in a normal Peert's defense, which I know Alan likes. So that is the Peert's fianchettoing. And white takes the big center, and he attacks immediately. Now that's very early to attack that's such an early stage. And often black in this position will play here. And the idea of that move is that after black plays c5 and knight c6, he's got all his pieces, including this knight, aiming at the center. He's breaking down white's center. So this is a classic opening where white gets a big center, which is an advantage, but if black can break it up, then white simply lost time by advancing his center, and black will get open lines. It's a very classic idea. Black instead went here, which is a little bit odd, but not necessarily bad at all. In fact, it almost transposes, I think, into some line the way the game actually goes. White develops, and black attacks the center. Same idea. Black's attacking both those squares, hoping to break up, weaken these pawns, and get rid of them, because otherwise these pawns are very cramping influence. And white checks, which seems very logical. And black interferes. Now the good thing for white is he's getting developed really quickly by checking. He's going to castle next. Good thing for black is he's also developing quickly. For example, if white takes this and black, say, takes back there, he's managed to get an extra piece out sort of for free. So there are advantages for both sides here. And instead of that, white now plays that move, which conceivably is a little bit of a mistake. And black could just equalize by playing here, and then maybe even check, followed by breaking up the center, or by taking this way. Actually, probably taking that way is even better. But that would only be about equal. So black does something else. Black just takes the center. Now that's kind of cool because white had two important center pawns, and now he has 0. So something good has happened from black's point of view. White's hoping that his open lines will help him. Now that move's a little bit ambitious, but not necessarily bad. Black castles. I think black's a little better here because black managed to break up white's center. Also, that pawn can be a little weak. Black takes, white takes. And even though it's an endgame, black still has nice chances here. He's threatening that as an extra center pawn. So Alan's played very well here. That extra move of the knight really didn't work out very well. Okay, black retreats. That's a good idea because that knight can come right into the center on these big squares. And you see what he got? Knight there threatens this pawn. Interestingly, though, that's not much of a threat. So black moves the king. I think this move's quite good. It defends this temporarily, and if the knight gets kicked out, then this knight gets centralized. And that kind of position is very strong for black. He's going to have the long diagonal. This king is exposed. Knight takes c2 is threatened. Rook e8 is coming with pressure down the e-file. There's just too much activity here. And this shows you how even when the queens are off, you can get quite a strong attack. This would be no fun at all for black. Rook, maybe this rook to e8 would be an idea. Taking is an idea. Check is certainly a big idea. And knight takes c5 is an idea. There's just too much going on here. Also that you can kick out this knight before you do anything else. Okay, so that would probably the best move. Instead, he puts the king over, which is not bad at all, because if white takes this now, black just goes here, opening up that beautiful long diagonal. As Alan knows, that's the Pearce long diagonal. And also the other good thing about that is this file's open. So white can easily lose a piece if he's not careful, or get his king stuck in the center with a check. Hi, Rich. Good, that's cool. I drew Jesse Cry playing the Vulture. It is a 2350 player. Oh, that's fantastic. Wow, now we're talking. What else? I'll go back up a little bit. Murder on the Orient Express. Oh, was Kenneth Branagh on that? Didn't know that. It accelerates black's development. Okay, that's why I brought it up. Okay. I know my theory just remembering is a problem. We'll get back to that. That's always a problem. I can't remember theory either, so we'll talk about that. There's some real benefits to studying, even if you don't remember the specifics, though. Huge benefits, and we'll talk about that. In the meantime, we're back to this game, aren't we? So white doesn't take that pawn. White comes back. Black plays here. Now that's kind of slow. I mean, you're trying to break up the center. Maybe, Alan, this is your first real mistake here. You've developed quickly. You've got this knight coming into great squares here somewhere. You've got these knights that are vulnerable in the center to be attacked, and you're just trying to get your pieces out quickly. You know, rook c8, open lines, and instead you make this very slow move. So sometimes you just have to think in terms of development. I think black is definitely better in this position, for sure. You can also just play a simple move too. Something like this is a good move, and I'm not even sure what white would do because his knight. Oh well, I guess white could take that, but then you have rook e8, and now you've got that same problem about pieces falling on the f file. This could be actually disastrous because there are going to be pieces falling on the e file. Okay, so let's go back to the game. So we have this a5 move, and white takes, which is maybe pretty cooperative. Knight takes, castles. I think bishop g5 would have been a much better move, a little more awkward for black. Knight c6. These are just, I don't know if these are good moves or bad moves, but they're okay in any case. There's nothing really wrong with these moves. So white's got his pieces out, black's got his pieces out. We have even material. Black has bishop versus knight, which is a small advantage. This is a question of calculation here, because really now this would be quite a nice move for white, I think. Because he's got the 7th rank, the knight's very well placed, and this knight can be chased back very easily. So maybe knight b4 wasn't the best move. Just sort of develop a piece instead. Instead of what black took it, and white did get to the 7th rank, but black's on that pawn to make up for that. So I imagine it's about equal now. And that's too passive. I mean, what you really need to do is get. Okay, now this is instructive, and I think there are some instructive things in this game. Here, white's attacking on the 7th rank. He'd like to maybe even get 2 rooks on the 7th, maybe take a few pawns. Usually if you have to slow down and make a move like that, you don't have any counterattack. You haven't activated your rook. So if you possibly can, you want to play more actively. You want to do something that's more aggressive. And in this case, it would be this. And I wouldn't be surprised if black is even better here, because look at these pawns falling, and that's going to be a pass pawn. So just for example here, now he's on that twice, so you might want to get rid of the knight. The knight probably comes in. Now you take another pawn. And I seriously doubt if white is even quite equal here. This bishop's going to be very handy coming into these dark squares. I'm not sure where exactly yet, but it depends where this rook goes, or this rook. The check does really nothing because of this, by the way. I didn't mention that. And then this is covered. So so here we have black a pawn up, and with probably as many threats as white has. It might be a draw with good play, but anyway, so this is one of those stay active kind of positions, because after that, now this is attacked, and that knight coming there is going to even have another target. So let's just see what happens. Okay, so he tries to oppose rooks, probably not the best move. White takes, black takes, and now all of a sudden white's 2 pawns up, right? So black counterattacks. Comes back. That's good. Probably white didn't do the right thing here because at least black gets a pawn back now. So that's pretty good counterplay. These are doubled. So there's a decent chance that even though you're pawn down, you're going to be able to do okay and draw this game, although that's not clear at all. Now from now on, black put up a really good fight, so maybe he couldn't have drawn it. So here we go. Okay, now the idea is a knight versus a bishop. At least black had their pawns on both sides of the board. That's usually good for black. But the fact that these pawns are not able to be attacked, and this king is already more centralized than black's king, means that white has all the chances here. He is a pawn up still, but black had chances to draw. So I'll just show you this. I think there's an instructive finish. That one of the reasons Alan sent me the game was because, okay, now white's really coordinated well. He's even on that pawn, but black's trying to get into the king side and get some passed pawns himself. White goes ahead and takes it, and black starts advancing on the king side. Good idea. There's not much else to do here. I'm not sure if these are particularly perfectly accurate moves, but they're decent. And now black plays back. The idea is if he can get rid of one of these pawns and then maybe chase that one, and while that one's queening, he can queen his own. It comes very close to working. So this is well defended. And he, in fact, gives it up now. I don't know if that was forced, but it's probably white is winning anyway, just by advancing his pawn. He thought he could draw by running over and taking that other pawn. So here's how it goes. Now he gives us a double exclamation point. I just wanted to show that there was another way to win too, which is just move the king up and escort the pawn up. And you'd think that wouldn't win at all, because black would be queening the pawn too, but let me just show you this. H4, C6, king, probably G2 here, and you might wonder how could this possibly be winning for white, but it's instructive. The whole ending here, the whole last part of this is instructive because you'll get positions like this quite a lot actually, and you'll have to figure out whether you get an instinct for whether they're winning or drawing. So here he just keeps checking. Is that right? Yeah. And now just in time the knight comes in. I wanted to show you, I'm sorry, the knight comes in. I wanted to show you how the knight and the queen are able to win in a position like this. Okay, now the queen is attacked, so the king has to go this way. Is that right? Yeah. And now knight, how are we doing this? Knight g4 doesn't work. Oh, I got it, queen d6. There we go, queen d6. And the problem now is the king goes here. That's knight is covering b7, so you win the queen. Knights and queens coordinate very well in simplified positions. People act like knights and queens are always a great combination. Well, that partly comes from the endgame. They tend to be very, very good in the endgame. A lot of mating patterns. That's not always true in the middle game, or even in the late middle game, or even in the early endgame. It's not always true, but that's where that principle came from. So that would win, and I guess there's nothing else to show. Is there anything else to show? No, that's it really. Okay. Oh wait, I didn't show what would happen if he came down this way, and then we have this mate, this here. So that's kind of a pretty piece of geometry. Now in the game, something equally instructive happened. White played this move, very smart move because he calculated very well. As I say, king b5 would have won, but this wins for another reason. Now it looks like black's queening just in time, and now the knight is going to be too far away. Well, yeah, it really is. I don't think it's going to quite work because the king's kind of in the way. That's a kind of technical point. But in any case, white has another way to win this. Now if the knight tries to come in, that's stalemate, right? Or if the king tries to come in, that's stalemate. But white has this way of winning, and you should know about this. You let him queen, and then you have checkmate. That's the idea. That's the way to play that. So it's very pretty. The king came back so that it could support that. But you should know that if one side queens right after the other, and you've got the queen close to the king here, and the queen's in the corner there, that you can often get some sort of checkmating pattern. Okay. Okay. Very, very nice game, and I think a lot of something you should know that you're going to see that quite a bit actually. That kind of an ending. And if you know the ideas and you can calculate it in advance, you can beat people. Okay, I noticed a lot of grandmasters being kind of flabbergasted with the rise of the London at the top level. Yeah, yeah, it's just something to play. I don't think it's going to be there forever, but it might be. I mean, there's several new books, and Jan Gustafsson says something along the lines of, quote, "The London isn't a good teaching opening. It doesn't demonstrate good principles." Well, I don't know about that. That's a very odd thing to say. I think maybe for the 23, 24, 2500 player, that's probably true. But for regular opening principles, it's great. I guess I don't understand that. It's straightforward development. So so that's did I feel similarly when it started getting popular? No, I didn't feel similarly, but I wasn't really thrilled. I mean, for one thing, I'd had some problems myself playing the black side of the London, so I was kind of thinking, oh golly, that's well, this gets popular, it's bad. I have to face it all the time. Um, and I think in general, its reputation as being a little bit kind of sterile. You know, for example, this big main line, and I think we even talked about this. This main line. And you can play knight f3 first in this line, but there's, you know, technical issues. But this whole thing here that people have played so much, you know, a lot of the popularity of the London had to do with positions like this being all kinds of pretty wins for white and ways to get positional advantages. But now I think it's almost solved. So, like many openings, it was more fun when it was first played a couple of years ago, and now when you play the London, you have to count on playing some other ways that maybe aren't quite as fun or quite as interesting. So, Magnus playing it, yeah, yeah. No, but really, even before Magnus Carlsen played it, there were a lot of people playing it, and I mean, really a lot of people actually. Just because what happened is that I think White just got so tired of defending certain things. I mean, first there's so many things you have to learn so much about if you play, for example, if you play this move instead of bishop f4, for example. You have to learn king's Indians and queen's gambits and Nimzo Indians and Benoni's and Grunfelds and all these problems. You can kind of solve all that by playing the London, either with bishop here first or knight here first, and playing there. It really limits black's possibilities, and there's nothing quite as critical to memorize. If things go wrong, they're going to go wrong in some very small technical sense. You're not going to get checkmated or anything, so it's considered very, very safe. Now you can play the London against either e4, d4, d5, or against uh, something like this, for example, like a King's Indian London. And they're both perfectly okay for white. And you know, some people play. Kamsky played the London for years. He also played the Tory attack, but he's played the London for many, I mean, 30 years or something, regularly. Whereas not too many other players have played it that regularly. I think Kovacevic played it for years, maybe a few other players. But now it seems like everybody tries it once in a while. I've tried it a few times myself as white, actually. Um, okay, good question. So what else have we got here? Oh, the vulture. There's the condor. Oh, I don't know the condor. Is there a condor? No, I don't know if I know the condor. There's the hawk. The hawk goes here. Whoops. Here, here, here. No, no. Wait. 94 now? Possibly. Oh no, I think there's a C. Is there a C4 in already? Is that the hawk? Maybe someone can tell me. I should remember these things. Yeah, I think that's the hawk. Is that the 94 already? Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe it's this first. Yeah, I think it's this right away. Someone can tell me what they think. Anyway, Booker has a whole bunch of these things. My favorite one of all time with Booker was, and very hard to refute, is the Macaulay Mababy, which is an Olyekin defense with knight e4. You notice the knight's almost trapped. Like if you had two moves, you could trap the knight. It wouldn't have any retreat squares, right? Everything's covered. But you don't have two moves, you only got one move. So white plays, either he keeps attacking the knight and it goes that way, and then if you attack it again, here's the amazing move. You play knight here. So the idea is just to make white get a big center, and it turns out the knight on a6 has more function than you would imagine. I know you're not going to believe this at all, but it's actually almost reasonable. Almost makes some sense. The knight on a6 supports the c5 move for one thing. Sometimes it can come back to b4 or c7. And you know, white would rather not have played this move e5 too early. That's sort of the thought. And the other way white can play it is try to trap the knight to begin with by playing d4, and that gets very messy and complicated. And I think f6 is one of the more interesting moves there. The idea being that if f3 you play here, and if he takes it, it's sort of, well, big deal. You know, you've got doubled pawns, but you've also got the bishop pair. So anyway, the Macaulay Mababy, great stuff. except it probably isn't that good. But as you can imagine, it's probably not that good objectively. But he won a lot of games with it because if you don't know it as white, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get something. You might be overrating white's chances, right? It's easy to overrate white's chances because it looks terrible for black, right? It just looks awful. And because it looks so awful, you're going to be overconfident. Booker, by the way, is quite a strong player, and I don't know, is he probably, I think he was roughly a 23 or 2400 FIDE player many, many years ago. I don't think he's played for a while, but so we're not talking about a joke here. He was playing good players and beating them and drawing them and things like that. Okay. I was playing the London way back in 2009. That's 8 years ago. I was hated by chess players. Yeah, but to answer that thing about development of principles, that's a crazy statement. I don't know what he's talking about because it's the extremely principled opening. You just play either the knight first or the bishop. The main reason he doesn't play the knight first, or used to be, because that move is maybe a little stronger than it is after bishop f4. I don't even know if that's even true anymore now that I've really looked at it a lot. But anyway, bishop f4, and let's say just say black develops, white develops. These are standard developing moves. You're getting your bishop out in front of the pawn chain. You're going to bring your other bishop out, and you're going to castle. And you're going to play. This is chess. This is beginner's chess. So it's basic, principled, normal chess. So I don't see how we can say it doesn't follow chess principles. And the same thing's true in the London against the King's Indian too. This kind of thing. There's absolutely nothing unprincipled about this at all. I don't know why anybody would say that. And sometimes you want to save that bishop. You don't always have to, but you can. And black aims for either this move or this move. And we've talked about it quite a bit on this show by now. I bet if you go back and look at that list, you'll see 5 or 6 London questions and answers. We've talked about quite a few systems here. We've talked about knight c6, c5, playing for e5, all kinds of stuff on this show. But no, I disagree. I think it's very principled. I mean, that's like saying that let me see, e4, e5, bishop, knight f3, knight f6, bishop c4, that's not principled just because it develops and then you play d3 and you castle, right? Or you play c3 and play for d4. But I think you can learn plenty of things about chess principle from this position. But anyway, that's just my opinion. He might have been kind of joking too. He's got a good dry sense of humor. What's the modern view of the knight or poison pawn? Isn't it a draw or something? I gave it up. I had to. I was aging like a president, meaning the poison pawn, I guess. Jacob saying that he gave it up. Oh, he's got a Cubs thing. The Cubs aren't doing that great this year. I guess they're only a game behind in their division, but don't they only have about a 500 record? Jacob, you better get rooting for your team here. They need more support. John Thomas is from Chicago too, so he knows something about the Cubs. Okay, what was the question? Knight or poison pawn. Let's just show everybody what it is. Oh, I should get back to my list of stuff though. Okay, so here's the Najdorf poison pawn. This is called the Najdorf Sicilian. The Sicilian defense is c5. This is the open Sicilian where you play d4 and knight takes d4. And now there's many moves here, but one of them is called the Najdorf. It's the opening of champions. It was played notably by Fischer and Kasparov, two of the greatest world champions, or two great world champions in any case, and many other people too, for example, Najdorf, and many modern players. Almost every modern player at some point or another goofed around with the Najdorf. The current crop of players, the main ones are Nakamura, Vashir Lagrave has played tons of Najdorfs, and Svidler, and Gelfand. I'm trying to think who else of the very current, absolutely contemporary players who've played it the most. And practically everybody's played it some, but I would say those are the main ones. They play right after your show. Who's that, John? I probably missed something here. Anyway, I'll get back to that. What was I going to say? Oh, okay. The poison pawn goes like this. Bishop g5, which is certainly a super critical move. For a long time, people just wouldn't play bishop g5. They just got kind of sick of it as white, and black was considered perfectly okay. But then they kind of went back to it, starting maybe 5 to 10 years ago, and there have been a couple of whole books recommending repertoires of bishop g5. E6 is still the most common move, and f4 is still the most common move, and there are options all over the place here. And this is called the poison pawn. Black can simply develop instead, either play knight d7, which is fairly modern, or play this first, and just get your pieces out like that as a typical structure. But this playing out here fast is called the poison pawn. It was played for many years, kind of sporadically, but when Fischer played it, he made it more of an official, respectable kind of opening. And I guess Andy Soltis made some sort of comment in one of his books about when he was a kid, everybody said you can't take the B pawn no matter what because you're just losing, and that turned out not to be true. But actually, even as a kid, I remember I looked at a lot of lines, not in the Sicilian, but in other openings where you take that B pawn. So I don't know if strong players ever believed you couldn't take the B pawn. But anyway, the poison pawn now, the main line is this going here. That's so that once black takes this pawn, he's not double attacking, he's just attacking the rook. And this is a famous line. And then all kinds of things can happen. One of the things that can happen, oh, by the way, h6 sometimes is thrown in first. But this is sort of this for a long time was considered a forced draw, believe it or not. Either white got a huge advantage with his attack or black pays perfectly, and white really didn't have any choices except to take this famously drawn position. So that kind of ruined the poison pawn for a while, which is that especially neither side particularly wanted to play it. Black wanted to have winning chances, but so did white. But black in particular didn't want to go into a forced line like this. And what else was I going to say? Well, this was the original move, which John Thomas, for example, is very familiar with, and there were countless millions of games of this. By the way, h6 is, in modern days, h6 and bishop h4 is in. Originally, this was the way they played it. And Tal, for example, played a beautiful, wonderful attacking game with that move. For a long time, people were playing this move and sacrificing all their pieces on e6. And there was a famous Byrne Fischer game. And at any rate, all this has been played for a million years. So the question is, as far as I know, it's still okay for black. As far as I know, it's doing okay. The other day, there was that poison pawn where Caruana, was this? No, that wasn't it. I'm sorry, the Caruana game wasn't a poison pawn. So as far as I know, and I really don't know, so you'd have to look it up, we'd have to check it out, the poison pawn is still considered sound for black. But there are many, many options. I mean, obviously, this is what Spassky played against Fischer, and that's important, and all kinds of things are important. You can also decline the poison pawn by playing a move like this. The idea being that if check, you can put something in between. That's why if these moves are in, it sometimes favors black because he can play check and take the f pawn. So what's the question? The question is, the answer is I actually don't know how it stands in theory right now. But I suspect it's still okay for black as far as I've seen. You might want to say yourself. Yeah, the queen d3 Caruana was in what order? Was it right now? Maybe Colin, you can tell me that. It's an older move, and it has to do with getting to the g6 square, so it's mainly in this position with h6 in. In other words, something like this ends up with different orders. And the idea is that sometimes now there's going to be, that square is going to be vulnerable when this pawn goes, for example, or if there's a sacrifice on that square. But I think that was actually a different variation. I should know. I just annotated the game at some point, but I'm getting confused. Yes, you can play a3 for sure. That's an old-fashioned move. The idea being that if queen takes b2, there's knight a4, winning the queen. Notice that all these squares are covered. The a3 move stops him from getting there or checking. But of course, it's a funny move. It's kind of slow, and it kind of means that if you play here, he might end up taking it anyway or something. So it's not a forced win or anything like that. It's not a refutation of the poison pawn, but it's a move you can make. And normally, what I think I've seen people doing on the white side of poison pawns is just trying one or another. So there's many systems against it, and they just try one of them, whether they think it's really that strong or not. Anyway. Okay, so as I say, a lot of these systems now, black plays h6 first. It helps in a lot of variations to play h6 first. Okay. Oh, here we go. Queen b6, queen d3 right away. Okay, let's take a look. Thank you, Colin. Okay, so apparently that game went queen d3 right away. And I don't know, is it impossible to take this thing? I suppose it is, huh? Why is that impossible? Is it because of f5 or something? Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look at the theory. I didn't realize that this was any better. Queen d3 is any better than queen d2 in terms of taking the pawn. All right, what do you think of the French Rubinstein and the French Knox? We've talked about both of these on this show, so you can go back to the the thing on Facebook, John L. Watson, 3 words, John John space L space Watson on Facebook. I have a list of all the topics we've covered, both by ECO code and by their name. So you'll see Fort Knox and Rubenstein there. What do I think? I think that it's reasonable. You could try this for black. It wouldn't be that bad a opening to start out the French with because it's very solid. The idea is to play here. Now the Fort Knox is this. I've never been as excited about the Fort Knox as other people, but for a while I kind of like this position a little bit. I wrote about this in my chess publishing column, but this is much more common, followed by very simply this. And we talked about some of the ideas, which were that if the knight ever moves, sometimes black plays bishop takes followed by c6, and he plays what's called a restraint center. We were talking about that the other day, actually. Just for example, and this is not a very good example because I probably wouldn't play bishop d3 in this order, but playing this position. This is a well-known, this is kind of the Fort Knox idea. And the reason it's called the Fort Knox is because this is so super solid. It's impervious to any pawn breaks, is the idea. It's super solid. What you've done is you've left yourself with your good bishop, because your pawns are on other colors. On the other hand, white still has space and he has 2 bishops. We discussed this a little bit. I still like white. I think long term, and one thing I've noticed about the Fort Knox is that overall white does very well with it, partly because black has so little counterplay. Now black can play for e5 or c5, but usually white can stop that effectively because his bishops become more active in those open lines. So I'm not a big fan. Somebody, I think it was Svidler, played this queen e2 line, and I was very happy. Queen on the last move, just very simple traditional line with queen e2 next, and I was not real happy with it. But it's a possibility. Now the Rubenstein is much more respectable. George Meyer of the world-class grandmaster from Germany. I know world-class is a little funny, but when he plays world-class players, he's about a 2,700 player. He plays the Rubenstein. That's the Rubenstein, is to play here. And of course, white can take that, or white can play bishop d3 or whatever. But the main idea of the Rubenstein, we talked about this, I think at some length the other day, is you're going to play c5 and break up white's center. And then you're going to try and get an equal game. And it's kind of hard for white to stop that. White's got a lot of different plans, but black can pretty much get his freeing move in. And then it's just a question of white still has a little bit of space or too much piece play or something like that. So I won't go into any more detail. We looked at some of these lines before, and if you want to, you can send a question to Ask I Am Watson and ask about a specific line. Yeah, and you can also play this, of course. But I believe in the Rubenstein more. I like that idea of c5, just breaking up the most important pawn of the board here. And if he plays c3, which he often does, you can either isolate that pawn or force him to take back with a knight or queen. And then, in other words, let me just show you that. Let's say white plays c3 right away, for example, which he sometimes does. I think black can play c5 immediately. Oh, whoops, no, you can't give up your knight, can you? Excuse me. If white plays a move like c3 here, I think bishop e3 is, knight e5 is played here sometimes with the idea of bishop e5 check or queen a4 check. I believe this line is equal. If you don't like that, you can play bishop d6 first, for example, or bishop e7 or a6. If he plays a slow move, let's say, and you can play c5 is the idea, and break up the center and get 4 against 3. We've talked about 4 against 3. White has a queenside majority, 3 against 2. Let me do this. Their a6 may already be in, for example. Let's just make some moves. A position like this tends to be equal, even though black's behind in development, because contrary to some of the first books you ever read in chess, this queenside majority isn't really very good. And that's true of the Sicilian too. Very often that queenside majority, black actually works hard to give white the queenside majority so that he can have the 4 against 3. You'll find this in the Caro-Kann, you'll find this in the Queen's Gambit, you'll find this in quite a few openings where this is a very desirable pawn structure for black. Now it's not as desirable here because white's gained a lot of development. You know, he can play bishop here next, he can play actively bishop f4 rook e1, but I think it's an equal position. Very good book by Hans Langrock about the Rubenstein. Uses Meyer's games all the time. Excellent book. Very short, easy to read book. It's by Russell Enterprises, publishes it. So anyway, that's the Rubenstein. I went on too long about that. I should get back to the things I had prepared here. I was asked about, and we have games coming up too. What is your, this is last week from the chat, what is your take on the semi-Tarrasch? Is it worth studying or is it just fun for white, torture for black? And then Colin added, Kramnik loves the semi-Tarrasch. So one thing I wanted to point out about this, it's certainly the semi-Tarrasch is playable, no question, and we did talk about it in a previous show at one point. In fact, we talked about the exact line that Kramnik played. Let me put up a game. EX72. Let me put up a game. It is, I think, a Kramnik game. No, this is Roney and Kramnik, yeah. We won't play the whole game over, but okay, there's the Queen's Gambit. And White played knight c3 in this game. Now, often you'll see the semi-Tarrasch against knight f3. And if White doesn't play the Catalan, which of course you've just allowed as black, if White plays this, then black plays here, and when White plays takes, you play knight takes, and that's the variation that Kramnik will play. He won't play any other order really, or he'll play other orders, but he won't play any other position but this one. And I'll show you why. The reason why is you'll see in the game that this happens, this exchange, and now black has the option of getting rid of that bishop with check. And then this will transpose into the game. But this is what he's after. He wants this position, the traditional semi-Tarrasch. What I wanted to show you is that against knight c3, you're probably not going to get the semi-Tarrasch if White plays this first. Because after knight here, if White just plays, for example, this, and black plays takes, well, now you don't have to play knight f3 and e4. You can just play e4 right away, for example. And here's the difference. In this position, White doesn't have to play here transposing. White can play a move like rook b1, stopping bishop b4 check after takes. Or he can play a move like a3, which is what Lars Schondorf gives in his book. And then White just goes ahead and builds up his big center, but White has avoided that exchange of bishops. And Lars Schondorf thinks White's a little better. I agree. I think White's just a little better in these positions. And that's why you won't see, so you can't just play the semi-Tarrasch unless White cooperates by playing an early knight f3. I think that's something people don't realize. That's why I mention it. It's kind of important. It means that you probably have to study something separately against knight c3. And even here, for example, you're not going to get a semi-Tarrasch out of that position either. So just so you know, just so you can't force a semi-Tarrasch. So you'll have to study the semi-Tarrasch lines, but also study something else. And that's a small disadvantage maybe for the practical player of having to study two Queen's Gambit systems. Okay, in this game we got a regular semi-Tarrasch because White does commit to knight f3. And let me just show you. Here, takes is the standard move. Now this is also called a semi-Tarrasch, just plain here. In the books it's called a semi-Tarrasch. And very popular line. Black can play this move. I think I showed you this once on this show. It's kind of a cute way to break the symmetry, but normally black will just play with the symmetry. And often White will play this move, or maybe start capturing and playing bishop b5 like Karpov did. That's the positional way to play, the very slow way. You can imagine that black should be able to equalize in a symmetrical position, but certainly there's plenty of play there. It's a very fun line, actually. But in this game, he plays the more natural move. And what he's thinking is that black's going to play here, and White's got a good version of the Tarrasch defense. For example, bishop g5 here is a very good move. You don't even have to transpose into the main line of the Tarrasch defense, which is also pretty good for White. But you can play bishop g5 right away because the knights come early to the f6 square. That's considered slightly better for White. Okay, so black takes this way instead. Now White can still just go here and play sort of a normal position that might become, for example, an isolated pawn position, one that we've talked about before. We've talked about this exact position actually. And that's an interesting position because White has the one weakness, blockaded, but White has very good attacking chances and very active pieces. I'd rather play White in these positions. And let me check the chat and make sure I'm not just talking away here without looking. The Hawk. Yes! Thank you very much. Thank you, Kenneth Case. Excellent point. We'll go back and I'll show you that. And yes, that c6 restraint is like a Scandinavian. Very good. You guys are very knowledgeable. What's the idea behind b4? Well, we talked about that before, but I'll talk about it again. Fischer was tall, wasn't he? But he couldn't play in the NBA, I don't think. Okay, let me see. The movie. Okay, so I'm going to come back to all of this. I played the Rubinstein. I'd forgotten that. Interesting. Very, very positional and passive for me, right, John? I was an attacking player usually. You don't get that many attacks in the Rubinstein. I mean sarcastic in the book, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Hawk. All right, I'm going to go back and show the Hawk, but first we're going to show this game and the semi-Tarrasch. So anyway, this game goes like this. It's a Queen's Gambit, and he takes with a knight, and then he takes here. And now you'll see it's too late to stop bishop b4 check, which is the line that Kramnik and many other great players have been aiming for. Okay, I tend to still like white in this position. I don't care what anybody says. That's become a very common move instead of bishop c4. We talked about bishop c4 in this show, and often you'll get to a very similar position. You'll get to the position with knight here, here, and b6. There's also a way of playing with queen d6, very oddball move. For example, knight here, castles, and then this move to stop queen here in many positions. And also after d5 takes, there's no e5. Yasser Seirawan, I believe, used to play that move. And then rook d8 can be played instead of the sort of traditional move, which is this. This is the famous Tal Polagevsky game, and 1,000 games after that. White puts his rooks in the center and starts trying to push his pawns. And what happened in that game was, did I get this right? Yeah, rook here with knight c4 is an idea. Pawn up takes here. And white starts attacking on the king side because black's bishop's bad now and his knight's off on the side of the board. And so this happened, and white played queen f4, knight b2, bishop takes, check, and then there was this brilliant h4 move after king g6 or something. Someone will know this game. And it was won brilliantly by Polagevsky, and it was prepared analysis, and he wrote about it in a book that he wrote. Anyway, that's the famous traditional line. Well, in this position, these days, black's playing, and we mentioned this, we talked about this earlier on this show, black's playing for this knight f6 idea instead to hit this square, and then playing here, and then playing here, trying to force white to defend that with bishop d3, and then white plays often a4, a5. And the line I showed, just for the record, this might interest people a little bit, because if you want to play it as black, you'll want to know this. One thing that white, I don't want to get this wrong here. One thing that, okay, this is where that guy Koma, who wrote that book about true lies in chess, he came up with this move a5. Now people, as it turns out, Carlsen and Karyakin, I don't know who else, Carlsen anyway, is allowing the move a5, as Kramnik does in this game. I'm sorry, Kramnik's allowing this, and maybe Carlsen too. Carlsen played this too, I believe. But what he tries to show is that this weakness here on the open file actually is pretty meaningless, and that black's okay in this position. I was very impressed with this idea, even if it's whether it's true or not. It was very interesting analysis. He played it himself and went into some depth of analysis. Now compare this game, which is very similar actually. White plays bishop d3 right away. He's going to save a move on that setup. But rook c1 may not be a desirable move. That's the problem. Okay, he's anticipating, he's centralizing the queen, but also protecting that pawn against knight f6. So now that's already protected and white can do something else. And so what white does is play there. And the idea of knight e5 is kind of funny. I mean, besides going forward, he's not really going to be attacking this way, probably. At least I don't think he is. This is Aronian, so I don't know what he's doing for sure. But one of the ideas is to play f3 to really shore up the center, which makes this bishop look bad. One of the problems with this line is that if you just make natural moves like this or something, it's a little bit awkward defending this, and you can't later on move your queen out of the way because you're tied to defending this. So you have to, you don't get the move f3 in. So white's anticipating that. White plays here first in order to play this move, in order to play f3. At least I think that's what he's doing. Let me actually check this out. Okay, so queen e7, queen e3, and f3, yeah. So that is what he's doing. This is sort of the modern way of playing. And as I say, the other way of playing, the couple Kramnik, one Carlsen game and a couple Kramnik games is to play a4, a5. And black found out he could just take that and leave this pawn isolated and have an equal game. Very nice Kramnik game. Do I have it in here? I do. This is worth seeing instead of rook c1. Sorry about this, folks. I'll do this real fast, but it's very instructive. In this position, he played, I think, bishop c4, the old move, knight d7. Wait, knight d7 first, or castles first. Castles first, sorry. Bishop c4, now knight d7, just the plan I was talking about with knight f6 and b6. This is kind of the new idea. b6 first turns out to be better because there's some problems with bishop b7, d5, I think. a4, this has been played several times recently, and everybody thought that this gave white an advantage. Now you have to defend that. And then you have to defend this. You could play queen f4, by the way. Might be a slightly better move in my opinion. And then h6. That's probably working against some knight g5, e5 idea, which could actually be very dangerous with queen f4. A5, and everybody always used to think this was better for white, but Kramnik has shown that this is actually pretty decent for black. He played this amazing move, allowing tempo gains with rook here or rook here, because both those moves actually make the rook worse placed in many ways. This move looks attractive, but then takes you away from the defense of that pawn, which turns out to be kind of inaccurate. Okay, anyway, I think I don't really need to show more than that. That's basically why the semi-tarrasch is sort of working for black these days, but also gives you some other ideas. Okay, what else do we have here? We have the Illusion Defense, John Turturro. Yeah, I think that worked pretty well as a film. Yeah, the book is of course, much more famous. Did you all see the? It's called Brainwashed in English. It's based on Reddy's shock novella. What's it called even in German? I can't remember. Shock novella is one of them, but then there's the movie. It's called something else. Anyway, it's the best chess book I think ever, chess novel ever written, but it's also the best movie on chess that I've seen. So that's something you might want to look up. The English version, the subtitle version is called Brainwashed, and it features Klaus Jürgens, a famous German actor, and Claire Bloom. I know she does some English roles, but she's German, and she plays in that movie. Claire Bloom, you may have even heard of. Okay, so what do we have here? You played the rook against me once, and others too. Oh, okay. I played the R against me. Oh, the Rubinstein. How interesting. What a chicken I was. Let me see. Fischer didn't resign in game 1 after he captured on h2 the bishop. That game was played. Game 2, game 1, the hawk. Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's go back and look at the hawk. Thank you. Good reminder. Thank you. Yes, and I did know that. I just forgotten. It goes here, here. Yeah, and you can play the reverse position. I'm not as thrilled with playing it this way. You can do this exact same thing with white with one extra tempo. Play the move c5 in this kind of position. So what's the idea? The idea is that you're threatening to play check and also attack this pawn. So that would go something like, let's just have white play a slow move. Something like here, check, here, because you've got to defend the pawn, and then b5 followed by b4, and then you win this pawn. And you can even get more pieces on it. And even if white ever can defend it, you can break up the center with e6. That's the idea. And so let me see. So the way that white usually plays against the hawk is I think knight c3 right away is the main move. It's considered the main move. And after queen a4, which is the main move also, if white plays bishop d2, I believe you just play b5 anyway. Oh, no, wait. You have knight takes, don't you? What is the main line here? Does anybody remember? Knight d2, maybe. I think, let me see about e4. I'm trying to remember how that goes. Yeah, you can play this way. That's a gambit. That's not the right, I mean, you can do that, but it's not probably the right way to go. Knight d2, b5, because if he takes here, this is actually quite strong. This is very good for white. You've got a lead in development, and you're going to win that pawn, and you've got the better center. So what black plays is b5 now. And now white plays a4, because it turns out this move you can play here, I believe. Or knight b5 first, I'm not sure. Probably knight b5 first, threatening this. So knight takes d5, you play knight c4, you win a piece, and white stands beautifully well here. Knight c4 is just too strong a threat. Okay, but he doesn't play b4, he plays, what, bishop b7? Anyway, you get the idea. I'm not going to do a lot of hawk analysis, but that's sort of used to be sort of the main line. If white plays perfectly, as we show in Taming the Wild Chess Openings, Eric Schiller and I, or earlier books, I think white gets the better game. But at the same time, it has to be played well and it's fun. Now the reverse position, which I'll probably forget what the reverse position is, but it's basically, and I think Korchnoi played it once, it basically goes like, I'm sorry, wait, we're going to have to play c4 for black, aren't we? My fault. Okay, so knight f3, let's say here, here, here. Here's an old ready line, it's supposed to be just fine for black, right? And I mean, you could even play it right away. think that's kind of silly. Some people have played this, and then after a move like this, you would play c5, I guess. And after a move like f6, which is often played, you still play a move like c5 at some point. So it's kind of a reversed hawk, and it's extremely interesting. I talk about it in one of my books. I don't remember which one, but it's a quite an interesting line, kind of fun line. It's basically sound for white. You don't play it right away. Maybe, for example, after that move, you might play it right now, and you've got the hawk with one extra move. I don't know if the extra move is very useful, though, so I doubt if that's it. I don't like that at all. Sorry. I take that one back, folks. I'm allowed to take that back, right? Which way did I used to get the hawk reversed? Well, as I say, this is one way, and if black plays here playing this move, which opens up that diagonal and kind of makes it hard for black to play c5, which is a popular move. I thought there was one other way to do it. Let me see if I can remember offhand. Anybody got any ideas? I thought there was one other hawky way to play here. Well, maybe it's just a slow move. Maybe it's here, and if knight here, here. That looks horrible. I don't like that at all. Well, anyway, someone can figure that out for us. Okay, yeah, we talk about b4 in Taming the Wild Chess Openings. Thank you, Per Eric. Yeah, I don't like b4 that much, but it's not absolutely awful. There's two books about it by strong players. Well, actually, there's more than two, but there's two recent books by strong players, and then there's the old one by Sokolsky. This used to be called Sokolsky. This opening has multiple names. It has the name the Orangutan, which Tartakower called it. When he was in the New York International in 1924, he went to visit the zoo. He came back a day later. He played b4, and he called it the orangutan because he'd seen an orangutan at the zoo. It's called the Sokolskys because Sokolskys played it and wrote a book about it. It's called the Polish, and that's again after Tartakower, I think, who was a Polish player. So I think it was just named after him. And I believe it has one other name, but I can't think of what it is. I want to take up the King's Indian, sick of the Queen's Gambit declined. Okay, Anthony, you should do that. And then send us a question about it. Send us a question with what's giving you trouble when the King's Indian, and we'll start talking about it. Beware the Samish, says Colin Craig. Okay, for those of you who are just kind of starting out with chess, this is called the King's. First of all, he's saying he doesn't really like that. He's tired of that. So he wants to play the King's Indian defense. Well, this is called, whether you play c4 or not, this is called the King's Indian defense, this structure. With d6, not d5, which is a Grunfeld, but d6. And that's called the King's Indian defense. And if white plays all these moves, it's called a King's Indian attack. So he's going to take this up. Anthony's going to take this up, and he's going to start asking us questions about it. And Colin is afraid of or thinks that he should be very careful against the Samish variation, which is that. That's one way for white to attack the King's Indian. It looks like a 4-pawns attack, King's Indian, but with d3, not d4. Well, might need a little clarification on that one. Smyslov used to play it, but after knight f3. Yes, that's much more common after knight. Still played quite a lot. That's Reddy's order. Sometimes Reddy would not play c4 first; he'd play b4, and it's totally sound. If you think about it, one of the most famous lines with b5 is this, considered perfectly sound. So it's not surprising that with an extra move, white can play. In fact, often black plays here, and white's a tempo up on a very well-known variation. Why does it make more sense there? Well, because e5 can't be played. That's because the main thing, as I show in my books, in other books too, that move is just very hard to mate. You need to either defend this, which is too slow, or play this, which is Sokolsky's original idea. And Sokolsky used to claim that white has an extra center pawn, and I've emphasized how extra center pawns, how important they are. I mean, after all, in the Sicilian defense, you work like crazy. You lose a lot of tempi just to get an extra center pawn. But it turns out that you are losing too many tempi, and there's just too many tactics. It's too easy for black to play this position. He gets a rook on a file. He gets pawns up. Let me just show you a line, for example, just for fun. Here, and if white plays, for example, the way that Sokolsky wanted to play, which is to get rid of the second center pawn and have two center pawns to none, then black's attack tends to come too quickly, it turns out. And there's also some very cute lines where, for example, something like this. Let me see if I can come up with one of these. White plays, let's say there. Black plays here. White develops. And black has cute moves like this. There's a lot of tactics that get white in all kinds of trouble. Now there's a pin along that diagonal, and you can't play d4 because the king is attacked. And if he plays f4, you have knight takes e3, and this pawn is pinned. And there's checks and takes and things. Those kinds of traps are very common because white's development is so slow in the Sokolskis. So what white has to do is probably retreat at some point, and then black's starting to get very good development. That's what it amounts to. You can always just play like that. You can bring the bishop over there to attack white's king. Anyway, now I'm not saying that white can't equalize because he is white. White can get away with almost anything. Now the point is, what John's saying is that you can play knight f3 first, and after knight f6, which is certainly one of the very most common replies, white can play b4. And now there's none of this e5 nonsense. Well, I mean, you could still play it, I guess, but the bishop wouldn't have to lose time by taking it. So here, I think you would just have an extra center pawn. Black could probably play this, but somehow it's not very attractive. I don't know. Actually, maybe black could play this. White just develops quickly and does what he can, I guess. Yeah, this is probably quite playable for black, actually. And for white, though. It's not as many tactics against white. Let me see what else could happen here. I don't think I've ever seen e5 played for black here. Wow, something to look up. Something to investigate. This could be fun. I don't really see that white's better in this position. I don't know what you think, John. How absolutely cool. We'll have to look into this. We may have discovered something by accident here that black can get away with a c5 move. But anyway, the point is to get the bishop developed just like fianchetto, and you've seen that before with b3, right? This is a common variation to play like that in these kinds of positions. But when you play with b4, you're sort of discouraging black from playing knight c6. You're discouraging him from playing c5 because you're going to take that. c5 would be a nice move, covering the central squares. And so then when you play bishop b2, maybe you play a move like c4, and the pawn can have a nice influence on the game. Maybe later playing b5 or something like that. Okay, wait. So now we have another game. And this is one that somebody sent me, and I should show his own personal game, which is excellent, and I will soon, one of these weeks. But instead, he sent me an extra game called Between Tal and Kovalik from Montreal 1979. And this, oh my, 407. Okay, last thing of the day. Last thing of the day is to show this game. A very pretty game and very instructive. I like to show one instructive game but I won't do a lot of notes. Maybe I'll continue it next week. It's this is not Tal. Kovalik, obviously. Let me see. Okay. This is an English opening, and this is the old main line of the English opening called the four Knights. It's not really necessarily the main line, but it's one of them. And G3 used to be the main move, probably still is the main move. There is much theory here. And Marin has it in his book still. He still thinks white's better here. I don't know if that's true, but okay, so both sides castle. These are standard moves I'm not going to talk about a lot. Now, a lot of times you play E3 right away. It saves the tempo in the D4 line sometimes. But white just plays there, which is also legitimate. Black stops bishop G5. He doesn't really have to, but he does anyway. It's a good move. White plays A3, thinking about playing B4. E3 is more common. Black plays A6. And normally you would play A5. I mean, I think this is a slightly more popular move in this exact position. It's funny because when you play E3, sometimes A6 is better. But against A3 and D3, I think A5 is sometimes better. But that's just a technical point. Anyway, A6 is just fine. Black drives the bishop back. White develops his bishop. Okay, so both sides are getting their pieces out. They both have a fair share of the center. But the pieces aren't contrasting with each other, so it's interesting strategically, this kind of position. Then white plays an interesting move here. Knight here with tempo. It opens up his bishop, and it maybe thinks about playing this move f4. Even though that pawn's pinned right now, it won't necessarily be forever. So knight h4 is an interesting move. Black retreats. White plays, rook c1. Now the idea of rook c1 is that maybe he's going to play knight d5, And if black takes that, he's going to maybe take with the pawn, and then he's going to have pressure right down that open file. So that's sort of a mysterious rook move. And now black is doing just fine here, but he plays a very passive move. That's the first maybe bad move of the game for either player. Not terrible, but not particularly good. But Kovalik had an idea playing knight e8. It's a very clever idea. He wants to take advantage of the knight being on h4 and then just throw his pawns up there. This is a pretty good structure for black, and he's managed to do it with gain of time. So that's what's supposed to justify the knight e8 move. It just turns out that this is fairly loosening unless black's got even development. And black's kind of fallen a little behind on development. That knight is pretty strong there. So maybe the timing's just a little bit funny. White played there. That's a nice standard move. It stops this. It works on the queen side or knight b3. It's just a very handy move. If black plays f4, which is one of his favorite moves, that's a gorgeous outpost. These two knights are beautifully placed. So black plays that move instead because he wants to play c6 and get rid of that advanced knight. And white plays that, and that's the only reason this all doesn't work. That's a very, very nice move. You could play this one move later. You could play e3 and then c5 also. But this is a very pretty move with a really nice concept to it. After c6. Now here's an interesting point. This is Tal, the famous world champion, playing the extremely strong Lubomir Kovalik, who is probably one of the world's top 15 players at least at the time, in a super tournament. This tournament, by the way, was won in a tie between Tal and Karpov, as I remember right. And we've mentioned before, that's a great tournament book. I've mentioned before that the Montreal 1979 tournament book is just a great book. Okay, now this is interesting. I think white's just better here. And he could have played some line that would give him a really nice advantage, like there, with the idea of playing here. Even after that, playing here would give white an advantage. Or white could get an advantage with e3, because it turns out taking and taking, followed by check or something, is very good for white. So black would have to retreat, and this kind of position turns out to be good. I mean, not that great, but he has an advantage in all these positions. Or he could even just play back, and it turns out that's a good position too, especially if, well, black really probably has to take. And then what happens is you're going to get your pawn back because that's so weak. That's attacked a couple of times. So there were ways to play this sort of safely without losing material, but Tal is Tal, and he came up with this brilliant idea, which was to play here. An incredible move, really. I mean, not a move I would even think about making since you have good alternatives. Maybe I wouldn't think about it anyway. It's just too creative or something. But he plays there, just simply giving up a pawn. Now he has two bishops. He has the bishop pair, and often that's worth about a pawn anyway. But still, it's an amazing decision. Let me show you what the point was. White attacks that queen. The queen comes back. If the queen goes that way, white plays this move f4, and he's breaking down the light squares in the center. Look how all these light squares are attacked, either directly or indirectly. And that's a very, very difficult position for black. There's also the moves like e3 coming, which is another dark square position in the center, and maybe even queen h5 after e3. So that move's pretty depressing. So black correctly plays there so that on f4 there's discovered attacks, and that's not good because it's double check, and so you can't play f4 yet. So white plays e3, natural move, chasing the knight back. And then he plays, I'm going to make a few more moves so you can see what's going on, d4. Now the funny thing about this move is he's blocking off his own bishop. And you sort of wonder, okay, sure, white's got nice open lines and he's got a lot of development, but is this really worth a whole pawn? And is it worth more than a whole pawn? Is it worth a pawn? Because black now, well, he's got to stop d5, but it's a good move he wants to make anyway because it means that bishop's trapped behind its own pawn. And you really start to wonder here whether this is actually... now you've got that beautiful outpost, and it's true that that's a bad bishop, but you know, people can live with bad bishops when they're a pawn ahead, and it's just kind of a remarkably far-sighted sacrifice because it may seem obvious to you that white's got more than enough for a pawn, but to me it's more like in a real game I can easily see black just sort of curling up and defending, and slowly but surely I get in time trouble trying to figure out how to break through, and suddenly suddenly I'm in trouble or something, or I don't have an obvious advantage. So these things have to be looked at real carefully. In this game, he just defends that and stops queen h5, by the way. And white simply goes slowly, plays on the open file. But It's a very interesting position because even though that's a bad bishop, it has places to go sometimes. It has good defensive functions. And white has no really obvious way of breaking through. That bishop's sort of biting on granite. This one's biting on granite. The rooks are beautiful, but it's not like they have direct threats yet. But Tal had faith in the positional advantages that he had here. I don't know if knight g7, that probably wasn't a very good move. But let me show you an example of a better move. Well, maybe a better move, but a move that looks more logical, which is bringing the rook over to the center. And then white just starts slowly advancing and breaking through on that side of the board. He's thinking about bishop here and b5, or just b5 straight away. That's the minority attack. The point is black's tied down, and white has long-term pressure for this pawn. It's not an immediate win or immediate mate, and that's having to do... Yeah, here's John Thomas. I guess he doesn't mind if I say he's the one who sent me this game, because he's the one who originally asked about giving up a pawn for the initiative. I think it's not only sound, but it's not just that white has enough for the pawn. He really does have much more than enough for a pawn, which is kind of amazing because black has time to kind of get reorganized. What happens in my games is somehow black exchanges that off and secures the king side, and I'm a pawn down or something. So I have to admit, I'm jealous of someone who plays this well and has this kind of foresight. Okay, so rook e8, I was just going to show a sample line. Queen up, attacking the pawn. Queen here, because taking the pawn would allow bishop a3. This is just a line I came up with, I guess, with the help of the computer, or maybe I just was making moves. Now I'm threatening b5, and that rook, it's hard for that rook to get out. Rook e6 I give, b5, rook fe8. Now isolate the pawn. Queen takes is an obvious answer, and then just take the queens off. So you're a whole pawn down still, but now you have a standard two bishop advantage. Two bishops in the ending are often worth a whole pawn, and this, of course, is an awful pawn structure. This one here with the big outpost there. So now you can see that he has enough for a pawn. I don't know if you can see that he has more than enough for a pawn, but he really does. This is actually a winning game, I would say. There's just too many squares. You're going to control the b file. And the knight is incredibly strong. This bishop can come back here attacking that pawn, but also just coming to a beautiful diagonal. Maybe it is obvious at this point, but let me show you I may have made a few more moves here. Rook e d1, that's to protect the d pawn in some lines. Rook b8, because otherwise rook b1 just takes the file for nothing. And now rook b1. And now what we have is a classic two bishops thing. Even though he's a pawn down, the two bishops are way too strong against the knights. This is the problem with giving your opponent two bishops. They don't really, it's later in the game that you get hurt, usually. Let me see if I give any extra lines here. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I didn't give up that file for nothing. I had him play here. And then takes. And then bishop here attacking this knight. That's such an important piece. And knight ge8. Trying to hang on to that piece. Rook here. We're on that pawn, but we're also going to play bishop f1. Rook b6, b5, a5, rook b5, bishop d8. Now we're threatening bishop d1. It's just bishops are such wonderful pieces in the endgame. Here they're worth more than a pawn. And white is effectively winning this game. It's actually the equivalent of a just totally winning position. And that may not be obvious, but if you play it out, put the computer on it, you'll see. Exactly, John Thomas. He says that normally black will, in a position like this, you'll see black somehow be able to give back the pawn, but here there was no way to do that. I agree that it's an amazing game. This is a purely positional game, nothing fancy. So let me finish off this game since it's actually way past time to theoretically stop. So the way the game ended was black played this. That's a pretty negative move. I thought that made it a little easier for white. So white continues his plan of playing for the minority attack. It's funny the minority attack can work when you're a full pawn down, but it's not just the minority attack, it's activating this bishop. So it's a couple of ideas here. Black attacks the pawn, as I said, in the other position. Now b5 is becoming quite a threat, I think. Actually, I'm not positive. So black gets out of the way. By the way, white could also, just to show you how good this position is, white could also play something like this, and then just a slow move like f3, stopping the only counterplay, which is knight g4 or knight e4. Then he can put the bishop on one of these great diagonals, probably f1. And this is also a winning position, but you have to kind of know, you have to sort of follow it out and play it through to see that, or just develop. That's fine too, because knight e4 is not that good yet, or not good yet because the bishop's hanging. But this move F3, very innocent move, turns to be out to be a really good move. Anyway, in the game he played it this way, nothing wrong with that. Okay, now then maybe somewhere around here he might have applied F3. This may be the only thing that Tal did wrong as white. He allowed this move, which I think is almost an equalizer, getting rid of that knight. It's close to it, and he really didn't have to allow it. He could have just stopped it with a H3 or F3 or something like that. So white continues the attack, but he still has plenty for a pawn. It's just not clear to me whether black can't defend now. This was an interesting position now. The computer kind of likes move now. The computer kind of likes this move because it activates this bishop. And white still has plenty. White's still better probably, but it's harder. It's very close. It's a tough position. Instead, he took first, which is also not bad. One problem with taking that first is that he's kind of there's a problem that this bishop, this diagonal might get extended, and there's also a problem that a bishop might settle in on that very strong outpost square, d6, and also bishop takes d5 check always has to be watched out for. So maybe it was a little too early to take the knight, but it's still a good game. And black plays f4. What black should play, oddly enough, is the move g4. Looks very odd, but that gives the queen somewhere to come, and maybe the knight's going to come to a nice square in the center. And this position's not that bad for black. It's better for white, but not that bad. But pretty soon, white got a just tremendous game. That bishop is wonderful on that outpost square. And now the file, he's coming into the 7th rank or 8th rank. So black moves over to protect those squares, and white finally activates that bishop. We've been talking about that all game long. It's never really been doing much on that diagonal, but now it has all kinds of prospects on this diagonal. For example, it might eventually go to d3 and head that way, right against the king. In the end, Tal usually attacks the king, and I think that's what happens here. I've actually forgotten already. Okay, queen there. There are some ideas, by the way, in all these positions. Well, here there's an idea of rook a1 winning the queen, by the way. So the queen has to retreat now because of rook a1 being so. There it is, bishop there. Now there's an idea of playing bishop here maybe and queen here pretty soon. I mean, there's bishop f5 right now, but that's a theme that's going to come up pretty soon, that bishop working on that diagonal. And in fact, it does. Now the rook's in a little bit of trouble because it can't go to f8, which is where it would like to go to. So this knight stands well, but the rook's awkward, the bishop's awkward, and that pawn is weak, and the king is very exposed. And you don't want to expose your king against Tal. I don't know if you guys all know who Tal was. He was world champion, one of the great attacking players of all time, if not the greatest attacking player of all time. And by the way, this is just finished now because queen takes e6 is threatened and there's no defense. It's really that simple. I don't even know if there's a try here. Maybe someone can find one for you. But there's just nothing to do. I mean, a move like this, you can play here and probably just take this. Yeah, that's an easy win. So he tries bishop takes and knight back, saving his piece, but he's allowing queen takes h6 anyway. Tal doesn't even bother because he's going to push his pawn through. Now the threat is something like bishop here or pawn up first or rook e1. That's a good move. I think it's the only move actually defensively, but it doesn't really work. So check. Now that very nice move. Threatening e7 followed by takes followed by e8. And white plays, black tries to defend, or black resigns actually. So there's just no way to defend this at all. I don't know if anybody wants to give it a try. I'm looking for a second what you could possibly do. But yeah, this is just lost. Notice that even the rook coming here at some point later might be a strong way to attack. Okay, folks, great, wonderful game, and thank you, John Thomas, for sending that. Carlsen said he would easily beat Tal if he was alive. Wow. But that's that same old thing, that all the players are better. I saw somebody saying this the other day. Oh, Yermolinsky, Alex, was just talking about, and he loves the old classical players. He's born and raised with them, but just talking about how players are just stronger now. They're just better now. And what Carlsen meant was the Tal who had the knowledge that Tal had at that time. If Tal was a kid and grew up and had all the same knowledge, had spent his whole life studying modern ideas and modern theory, and then probably Carlsen wouldn't say that. And if he would, I think he'd be wrong, because I think Tal was just a genius of Carlsen's level, actually. And so, but I think Carlsen, what he meant was, if you take the Tal even at his peak strength, although who knows, and you just had him playing Carlsen straight up, Carlsen would know so much more and be so much better in many ways because he's a modern player. Everybody is better now. And you would find that Carlsen probably would win against Tull. And I don't know if it'd be easy, but I think it would happen. So I'm sure that's what Carlsen meant. I don't think he meant it in that arrogant a way. Carlsen isn't generally that arrogant, so I think let's give him a break on that one. I think he appreciates all the great players. He grew up with the great players. He knew all the classic games, so he knows how brilliant these guys were. He just means that technically speaking, in terms of knowledge, Tull would get bad positions, and that he wouldn't get a chance to do the kind of attacking that he got. Um, Time for the Cubs. Yeah, there's enough time, but they better get moving. Yeah, they're lucky to be in that division. You know, usually St. Louis is so strong, and this year St. Louis is falling apart. When's the last year that St. Louis didn't have a great team? I mean, 30 years ago or something? That's just amazing. So, all right, folks, that's baseball for you. And thanks everybody for coming. I guess we went on a really long time, but I think it was fun and we covered a lot of stuff. I hope I didn't miss much on the chat. If I did, I will cut and paste it and take a look at it and answer that next week. One last thing. Email, please. Ask your questions and send your games to askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's AskImWatson at chessclub.com. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next week.